Hello, everyone. This is show 401 of the Paddock Pass podcast, brought to you thanks to KTM, Renthal Street and Fly Racing, as well as the support and energy of our Patreon followers. Much kudos to all of you. We've got quite a bit to get through on the show today. We'll take your questions in the wake of the Spanish Grand Prix in round 4 of the 2024 championship. We'll also talk about a couple of things or topics we learned in the paddock in Jerez last weekend, and also at the Monday test. And then we have an exclusive chat with the United States' latest flowering prospect, Joe Roberts. I'm Adam Wheeler, and I'm joined by David Emmett, who is somewhere inside Malaga Airport on his way home. Dave, after sitting next to me in the press room and touching and stealing my nuts for 5 days, I hope you found some more delights for lunch.
Well, I'm at a Starbucks, so no, I haven't. I've found some extremely mediocre coffee, but a rather tasty muffin.
And of course, our own nutty expert, Neil Morrison, who I'm sure, based on my own regular past experience, completely ignored his mother on the train journey back from Jerez to put his head into the laptop and his deadlines. How are you, Neil?
That is entirely correct, Dad. I will not deny that statement. And I would also urge our users that we're on YouTube now. So there is a real exclusive chance to see Dave Emmett sitting inside a Starbucks, which if that doesn't get you to our YouTube channel, then I don't think anything will.
Technically, it's not inside a Starbucks. It's in the seating area outside a Starbucks, right next to a super skunk, whatever that might be. Which seems somehow, I'm going to Amsterdam, so why not sit near a super skunk?
Well, the look of the stain is written all across your face, so it's it's a wonderful sign.
Please tell me you're having a large frothy cappuccino, Dave. Oh, there we go.
Look, David E.
He's showing us David A. There we go. First things first, it turns out there were quite a few people less at Jerez than initially reported. A sizable gaffe, but Dorna owned it. And for me, it doesn't detract for what was already like a great Grand Prix and another superb race. At the moment, MotoGP is kind of like the antithesis of something like Formula One. Yes, Jerez saw 5 Ducatis in the top 5, but you can't dispute the fact that the fans at Jerez, however many there were, got their money's worth. Views on the era, gentlemen?
I mean, the audience number, crowd numbers are entirely fictitious. They're a complete work of fiction. There were a lot of people there. There really were a lot of people there. I don't think there's maybe 2 or 3 circuits where I would actually trust the crowd numbers to reflect reality. But it's very, very difficult to actually know and be able to verify these. You never know how they count it. I don't think it really matters. Really, the only thing that matters is there were a lot of people at Jerez and the atmosphere was absolutely fantastic and they got fantastic races.
Yeah, it's always been quite confusing, Jerez, because for years and years through the 90s and 2000s, early 2010s, I think we always had the impression that 130, 140,000 people would come to Jerez on the Sunday. It was one of the bigger attendances of the year. And then I think it was in 2016, the Sunday attendance figures were cut to something like 65 or 70,000. The mayor of Madrid kind of blurted them out, I think, on live TV on the grid when she was interviewed. And yeah, from there I was always slightly confused, like, okay, what do we believe? Because there definitely, on that particular day, there definitely wasn't half the number of people that were there the previous year. So yeah, it's I think it's always worth taking some of the figures with a little pinch of salt. And yeah, I agree with Dave. It doesn't really detract. It's maybe a bit embarrassing for Dorna, but it doesn't detract from what was a pretty stellar weekend. And yeah, pictures that we saw throughout the Grand Prix indicated that the track was pretty much at bursting point. It was completely full. So what was it, 188,000, I think, for over the weekend? Yeah, not a bad number, you would say.
It's still the biggest crowd, I think, since 2013, over 10 years. So, yeah, like we said, still progress, even though the initial number was wrong. For people wanting a full wrap on what actually happened and who said what, then simply click on the previous show. We're bringing Sunday night podcasts from the circuits for swift race reactions, while our midweek shows are more about discussion and interviews. Is there anybody you'd like to appear on the Paddock Pass podcast? Then send us a message on Twitter or through SoundCloud or YouTube comments, and we'll try to put it on track. Another subject, guys, it seems that pre-Le Mans, we're going to get confirmation of the 2027 regulations that will change MotoGP, meaning that we'll have another 2 seasons of the current configurations of bikes before there is a shift. Dave, what do you reckon we can expect in that press release based on what we were hearing in Jerez?
Well, what we can expect is 850cc, 75mm bore, which means the stroke is almost identical, which it saves money because it means they don't have to change the bottom end as much as they would otherwise if they'd had to change bore and stroke, or change stroke massively. Much more restricted aerodynamics. They're not taking the aerodynamics away because they want MotoGP bikes to still look a bit special, but they're going to work with the size and space of the wings and what will be allowed, and ride height devices are gone. But I think that they're still sort of, they're still chewing over the wording and trying to get it right before they actually release the rules.
Neil, most people want the aerodynamics chucked in the bin, but the reality is it's not going to happen, is it? I mean, the manufacturers need to evolve and show some sort of technical progression in some way. It does also make you wonder where they're going to find a loophole or where's going to be the next sort of phase of development.
Exactly, yeah, because normally when restrictions are put in a certain area, that causes the manufacturers to seek advantages in another area. I mean, basically aerodynamics came about that way. I think Dave has said in the show before that this aerodynamic phenomena that we have in MotoGP is basically a consequence of having the spec electronics ECU brought in 2016. They had to find another way to try and limit wheelie and control that. Yeah, I think it's kind of important. Obviously, you're never going to completely discard aerodynamics because something like a fairing is aerodynamic by nature, but yeah, certainly a limit on what we have at the moment, I think, is not a bad idea. It does seem that there are maybe certain parts of manufacturers' aero which are there in place to try and create dirty air behind them, which by nature makes it a bit more difficult for bikes to overtake behind. I think it would be good to kind of get rid of such things like that. And yeah, fingers crossed, manufacturers won't be needing to set up some kind of crazy partnerships with F1 related people to try and get the best out of aero and MotoGP, because I'm not sure that that's the best thing for the sport.
Guys, we asked for your questions, and we've got a couple that we're going to tackle before we get to our interview with Joe Roberts. But Dave, one other thing on the technical side, all three of us attended quite an interesting sort of round table chat in the press in the paddock, during the course of the Spanish Grand Prix between KTM and Mobile One. And it was interesting to learn that KTM, together with this technical sort of giant, I actually installing like their own purpose-built lab, a certain Grand Prix in the paddock and at the back of the pit lane, or the pit box rather, that KTM are using. But I just wondered if there was anything that stood out from the round table that we can tell the listeners about that was pretty interesting, because the union between these two companies is actually quite unique in MotoGP.
Yeah, I mean, there was a round table last year at Austin, which was really, really interesting. They've talked a lot about, I mean, this is why people go racing. People go racing because to be able to do that kind of research and development. Racing is an extreme environment. It was also very interesting hearing them comparing, because Mobile One do the same thing in F1 as well, and they came in thinking, well, MotoGP will be a bit like F1, but actually it's very different. Unfortunately, they wouldn't tell us what, but that's just the way it is. But no, it is very interesting. What they're sort of looking for is to understand how I mean, it's especially about the lubricants. Obviously, there's also the sustainable fuels that they're working on, but the lab actually at the track is about analysing what's happening to the lubricants. The way that they're degrading under extremely high pressures and extremely high temperatures. And trying to improve lubricants to gain power. I mean, any reduction in friction is basically free horsepower. That's what KTM are looking for, and Mobil One are looking for that sort of thing to for lessons which they understand, which they can then sort of put into the consumer products. It's fascinating. Also, the fact that they literally build their lubricants sort of almost molecule by molecule. So they've got this whole range of molecules that they understand, and then they start to assemble them, looking for the correct combination to get the properties that they want from a lubricant.
Yeah, it's interesting that Mobil One actually produced bespoke products for KTM. I mean, I never realized that. I thought it would just be maybe some modified version of stuff they're giving to consumers. But the fact that they're using specialized lubricants and fuels is pretty impressive. Also, I like that Sebastian Rieser, the technical coordinator for KTM, described this component of the engine as like a doctor for the engine. That the role that this particular material is playing inside the motor is actually much more important than you think. And as you've underlined, Dave. Neil, was there anything that you sort of picked up from the chat that was quite cool?
Well, just the fact that, we did switch to 40% synthetic fuels for this year. And as we've spoken of many times through the first couple of weeks of the season, MotoGP is faster than ever. So I think initially there was a belief from the manufacturers that this would cause a kind of decrease in lap times. But I think it's testament to the sort of the science involved that they're able to make this change. And MotoGP is still faster than ever, obviously down to many factors. It's not the fuel, but the fact that it hasn't caused things to notably get slower. Speaking to Sebastian Rieser after this roundtable just on 2027, obviously when we go to fully 100% synthetic fuels, he was saying that, well, obviously it'll be very difficult to understand then, because we'll be going with a smaller displacement and different technical regulations designed to slow the bikes down. So we won't get a clear idea. But certainly from what Mobil One were saying, in their other disciplines that they've tried to compete with this, they're able to do so without a notable drop-off in performance, which is quite remarkable when you think of it.
You mentioned the fact that we were expecting a drop-off in performance, and because of the sustainable fuel. I mean, we haven't seen that. I think what it emphasizes is the fact that what's much more important is actually the tire, because it's this new rear Michelin tire, which is giving us so much more performance now, which is basically taking probably half a second, maybe 3/4 of a second off of lap times.
I think it was pretty cool anyway that, they were both transparent about sort of the work they're doing to a degree. Maybe we'll learn a little bit more about Mobil One and KTM and their sort of association as the season goes on, and particularly into next year as well. It doesn't seem like a short-term deal. I think they explained that they jumped out of MotoGP in 2003, and they said it was actually very difficult to get back into the sport with the right partner. So, but, this whole subject of lubricants as well as the 2027 regulations is something we'll be dipping into a little bit more detail soon, Dave, particularly when the press release comes out. And, we know the full scope of how MotoGP is going to be in a couple of years. But in the meantime, guys, like we said, we've got your questions in, so we're going to rattle through them. First one, I'm going to come to you, Neil, because there was actually a couple of people who asked, what happened to Maverick Vinales this weekend after an amazing, fantastic Grand Prix in the United States. There was almost like a little bit of a reversion to some of the type that we saw in 2023, boom to bust sort of thing. Can you sort of give just a summary as to Maverick's weekend?
Maverick, aka the random number generator, as Dave likes to call him, which I think is a pretty appropriate nickname. You could say this was reversion to the mean. This was random. This was strange. This was difficult to predict. This was not the rider that we saw in Portugal and Austin, which was a very settled, fast figure. I think there were two things. Maverick and Aleix had a really bad qualifying in wet conditions. Aprilia got their tire strategy wrong. They fitted the wrong compound of wet tire at the wrong time of qualifying, and they were left 11th and 12th on the grid. So that was difficult. Obviously, Maverick recovered from 11th in Kota, but I think this is Jerez is a very different circuit. It is quite difficult to overtake on. You might not have noticed that by watching Pecco Bagnaia's race, but front tire pressure and temperature was such an issue right the way through the pack. And really, from what I gathered, and I think what we all gathered, speaking to riders and team personnel after the race, was if you could get away in the first 5 or 6 places on the first lap, then you could have a good race. We saw it with Miguel Oliveira. The contrast between Saturday and Sunday. Didn't get a good start on Saturday, was way back. Got a good start on Sunday, was up inside the top 7, top 8 for most of the race. The same with Fabio Quartararo. Great start, great first lap on Saturday, but the reverse on Sunday, and therefore was mired at the back. And I don't think Aprilia had a great first lap. Again, issues with the clutch performance, meaning they didn't get either of the factory guys didn't get off the line well. And then once Vinales got into his rhythm, he was actually really fast. He was showing podium pace. So I'm convinced if he was on the front row or even the second row, Maverick would have been fighting with maybe Marco Bezzecchi. Certainly that fight for fourth with Alex Marquez, Bastianini and Brad Binder, he would have been there. So it wasn't a disastrous performance, but unfortunately, it was one of those situations again where the good potential that he showed on Friday went unfulfilled.
Yeah, there's positives. I mean, he loves Le Mans. It's a high grip track, and basically, to underline it in one word, Aprilia were undone by the weather. So the somewhat freaky conditions sort of ruined the Grand Prix for them. But well, I mean, let's see what we find in Le Mans in terms of temperature and also the climate. It could be another mixed bag for the Italian crew, and particularly the fast Spaniard. Dave, over to you for this one. Just Jono sent us a question basically asking what happened to Yamaha. I mean, Neil touched on the subject there for Fabio Quartararo, because Quartararo has proven to be a Jerez specialist in the past. Just for my 2 cents, it was interesting hearing the two riders talk about the lack of turning they're still suffering with the M1. And of course, Jerez is a pretty physical track because you're turning a lot of the time. So that was also, this seems to be one of the chronic problems at the moment for the M1 riders.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. There's a whole bunch of corners which are very fast, the fast turn where you need a lot of turning. And that was where the Yamaha used to be superb. If you think about turn 3, 4, up through 5, 7, 8, and then especially 11 and 12, the two fast right-handers leading back to the final corner. You need a bike to turn. And on Sunday night, both Fabio and Alex Rins said that they were suffering not quite arm pump, but basically their arms were done because they were having to grip onto the bike. They've made the bike, Fabio wanted more power. He got more power. It's made the bike much more aggressive. The price that they've had to pay for all of the power is to make the bike more aggressive, and that's cost them turning. They can't get the bike to turn.
29 seconds, Dave. Fabio was 29 seconds slower than his race time at Jerez 2 years ago, which I think underlines what you're saying there quite nicely.
Exactly. I mean, they've ruined the bike, basically.
Well, to be honest, I mean, if people want to listen, we did a really comprehensive notes show about the test in Jerez yesterday, Dave. But then Yamaha were the brand that perhaps turned up with the most radical or experimental stuff, and some of it seemed to work and some of it didn't.
Yeah, I mean, they did come with some really radical aero, which was only a little bit better. I think the other thing is it looks so different that it sort of fooled the riders into thinking that it must, it looks different, so it must be different. But actually, it was just a little bit better. They had a new chassis as well, which helped turning a little bit. But again, it's all small things. And what they really need, they need to fix the engine. It's as simple as that.
James Kay asked us to discuss briefly the TNT coverage, TNT Sports, that is. I mean, they're obviously airing in the United States now. And, it's not something we have a great deal of experience on. I mean, Neil and I both live in Spain, so we have DAZN as our partner. Dave, I guess you have Ziggo Sports in the Netherlands, but that's also pay-per-view, right?
Yeah, that's pay-per-view as well. So I don't get to see it because I have a different internet provider. So, I'm watching the Dorna I'm watching the Dorna coverage, which is excellent. But I mean, my view of the TNT Sports, Neil Hodgson, I know is really He's a really smart guy, very incisive, very thoughtful. They've got Michael Lavitt, who's incredibly good in pit lane. Like Susie Perry. What can you say about Susie Perry? Natalie Quirk is very good as well. The whole crew who actually put that program together are very experienced, very, very good. The bits and pieces I've seen have been good, but like I get to see maybe sort of 2 hours a year.
Yeah, they also have Gavin Emmett in the commentary box, and Gav sort of knows the sport inside out. He's fantastic at the job as well. And calling on to presenting duties, he can certainly do the job there. On the subject of commentary generally, I think a nod to the Dorna guys, as you said, Dave. I mean, like Matt Burt and Lewis Sotheby are doing a fantastic job in really complementing the action we've had on the track in the last two GPs. I think it's married the production perfectly in terms of having the visual and the audio side, as well as sort of all the information. I think maybe what the TNT guys now need to do is get that sort of baritone guy who does the Moto 2 and Moto 3 onto their team, because he would be a fine addition.
Not sure about that, but I think the Spanish Grand Prix did produce some interesting figures on Spanish television, because it was shown on free-to-air Spanish TV station La Sexta, and they got fantastic figures on Sunday for the MotoGP race. Actually, really good figures for the Moto 3 and Moto 2 races as well. I think it was 1.6 million people tuned in to watch the race. At one point, I think there were as many as 2.3 million people watching the Spanish Grand Prix, which is a huge, huge number for a live event for MotoGP as well. And that was a real contrast to the figures on DAZN, which I think were 125,000 or maybe a little bit over that. So I've had conversations with a lot of people in Spain who, when I mention MotoGP and that I work there, the first thing they say is, "Oh yeah, I used to love that, but then it went behind pay-per-view, a paywall, and I don't really watch it anymore." And this is, I think, this kind of evidence will provide Dorna, maybe Liberty Media as well, when the acquisition is completed towards the end of the year, with a bit of a conundrum, in places like Spain where the sport is so huge, you are depriving a massive amount of people, live access to it, because those figures were kind of Crivier era, 500cc sort of television numbers. So I thought that was quite interesting from the weekend.
Yeah, it's just that equilibrium, isn't it, between the revenue generated by people prepared to pay for TV rights and then having the mass exposure. That's something where, it's been Dorna's bread and butter for, decades now. And it's maybe something that has to shift. It's certainly something that's going to be interesting to watch in the coming years, that's for sure. And like you say, Neil Liberty will be reviewing the policy, you would have to imagine. David Windhorse wants us to go into the new tech rules. I mean, one sort of question he asks is about, lowering the displacements 850cc. What effect will this have on the balance of like power and horsepower? Does lower displacement make any appreciable difference to the relative advantages or disadvantages of the V4s versus the inline fours? Maybe, David, this is something we can also chew over when everything becomes official. We might even do a quick special Patreon show on this. But then, Dave, what are your first personal thoughts on the engines going down to 850? Is it going to be something that's a positive move, something that's going to require a shitload more investment by the manufacturers and they don't quite realize it yet? I mean, what's your perspective?
I mean, my perspective is that I got it very wrong last time we went through to 800cc. So I don't feel I'm particularly qualified to do it. I think it's really difficult to predict, because it's one of those changes where one manufacturer could get it right. I think the change in displacement is going to be less important than the change in aero and the removal of the ride eye devices. That I think is going to be much, much bigger, initially at least. I'm not sure that changing displacement actually is the best way to control. The best way to control it is to change the tyres, because the tyres, as we've seen this year, Michelin bring a new tyre which is only slightly different. It's not that much, and all of a sudden they're going 3/4 of a second faster. So yeah, it would be much better to control it through tyres. But the trouble is, you can't get a tyre manufacturer to make rubbish tyres. Nobody wants to do that, because they end up looking really bad. Buy our tyres and go really slowly. So yeah, I think it's going to be different. It is. I think the removal of the aero and especially the removal of the ride-out device is going to change the way that bikes accelerate. They're going to have to rebalance the bikes. It's going to change the bikes' geometry and weight distribution and all that sort of thing. That's going to be a much bigger deal for me.
Neil, Ewan Duncan asks if Pecco's third victory in a row at Jerez was his best ever performance. For me, it's still 2022 in Malaysia and Sepang, all the pressure, and he managed to deliver. But what's your view?
Yeah, I think Ewan should go back and listen to our Sunday show because we did discuss this towards the end of it. But just for the record, I think it probably was just because of who he was up against and kind of, I know the championship was at stake at the end of 22 and that made it so impressive what he did in Malaysia, but I also think the stakes were so high in terms of not being able to give Mark an inch and just how he decided to fight fire with fire. That really stood out to me. So yeah, my opinion is yes, it is his best ever performance. Yeah, for sure.
Neil, you also put a poll up on Patreon, and it seemed around about 65% of the people who voted said that Pecco was the rider of the day. So, I think there's an agreement there that it was an exceptional outing by the Italian. I mean, it was a world championship performance. So, yes, good one, Pecco. Keep it running. Dave, on to you. Gordon Nelson asks, how can Ducati make a decision on a second rider now? And it's not a bad observation because between Enea Bastianini and Jorge Martin, which you would assume are the two main candidates, Marc Marquez, of course, you could throw in there, but it would be hard to imagine Ducati having the budget required, perhaps after spunking it all on Pecco's new contract. It's going to be difficult for the Italians, isn't it, to swing one way or the other in the next couple of weeks?
I think the biggest problem for putting Marc Marquez in the factory team is the Ducati's tie-up with Monster. They've been there, I think, about 4 or 5 years now. That sponsorship has been there for a little while, and it's. I mean, it's not a massive. It's not the most important sponsor, but it is a good, strong relationship. Marc Marquez is Red Bull. I mean, he bleeds Red Bull pretty much. He's been Red Bull, I think, since he first became a teenager, more or less. There is no way he's going to leave. So, I mean, if it was the obvious thing to do is to put Marc Marquez in the factory team because it's clear that he is still capable of winning a championship. And if you want the championship, if you want the factory team to win a championship, then having Pecco and Mark together is probably your best shot. It's a lot is going to depend on who Aprilia can steal, basically, whether they take Enea, whether they take Jorge Martin. Maybe they take both of them, which would be interesting. But it's a difficult question. I think Sky interviewed Gigi Dall'Igna, and he said, he gets frightened just thinking about having to make this decision. So I don't think anyone is going to. I don't think it's an easy decision at all.
Neil, Jeff Jackson asks us, have Trackhouse turned a corner after Miguel Oliveira's decent finish in the Grand Prix on Sunday? Ralph Fernandez actually tested the 24 RSGP at the test. He didn't really have any particularly glowing comments. He didn't find a huge upsurge in performance. So I think the team said that Wilco Zeelenberg may have mentioned to us, Dave, in the pit lane that he might be in line for the bike by the midpoint of the season. But sort of based on his comments at the test, it's not like he's craving for it right now. But Neil, what's your thoughts? Do you think Trackhouse have made some progress?
I think they have made progress for sure. I think Miguel Oliveira has gone from feeling a long way off, comfortable aboard the 24 RSGP to where he is at Jerez, where he said he felt a decent step forward in basically high-speed corners. His confidence through the final couple of rides at the end of the lap was much improved. He also felt better, I think, with braking stability, an area that he's maybe struggled a little bit with in the last couple of months. Is it a massive step forward? I'm not sure. I think a large part of it is down to the fact that he got a really good start and was aggressive in the first half a lap and managed to make up a ton of positions. And I spoke to Wilco after the race, actually, and he said he wasn't giving me the impression that they had made a giant step forward. It was more circumstance that kind of played into Miguel's favour. So I think we should wait another couple of GPs, but I'm excited because I do think Miguel has the talent, the speed to be up there challenging Vinales and Espargaro to be the best Aprilia on the grid. Obviously, big change in that squad, personnel-wise, not so much, but just in general over the winter, and it was always going to take a little bit of time for it to get up to speed. But yeah, at least there are signs now that that it's coming together.
On to another Neil Roberts this time. He asks, will Jake Dixon get to MotoGP? And, well, I think sort of the short answer is no. At the moment, just Jake, we know, has the technique and the talent to go quickly, but he's sort of missing the other parts of the package, in my opinion. It might be a position eventually one day where his passport will help him, and there is an urge for a British rider to be in the Premier class. But at the moment, guys, would you concur with me that there's probably other names in Moto2 that are ahead of him in the pecking order?
I think the bigger problem is that Joe Roberts is he's having an outstanding season. Just been really, really good. Joe has got dual UK and US citizenship, so both countries can claim him, and that might be good enough for TNT Sports. Obviously, TNT Sports would love a British rider in MotoGP. I think it seems like, or it feels like, maybe to me. I mean, I'm sure Neil can tell you more about this. Jake is struggling a little bit with the adaptation to the Pirellis. He hasn't done as well as I was expecting.
Yeah, and they obviously changed suspension manufacturer this year, along with the IO team and the Intact team. They've gone from Öhlins to WP, and I think that is just, really, it's not the wisest move, because obviously you're changing a massive fundamental by performance in the tires, and then to do the suspension as well, it just means that there are so many things, so many variables that you're maybe not exactly sure of the outcome. Is that coming from the tires? Is that coming from the suspension? And you just need to look at the IO team, which has won the championship for the last 3 years. Celestino Vietti's had a pretty lackluster start to the year. Intact, Darren Binder is completely lost. No feeling, as I don't think he's even scored a point just yet. 4 races in. And Dixon as well. You have to feel sorry for him, because I think last year he showed that he is capable of fighting for the podium regularly. Maybe even fighting for the championship, but yeah, I think the suspension switch is costing him. And let's face it, the first couple of races just couldn't have gone any worse. Out of the first 2 through injury, and then crashing out of the second 2. It's not form that would get a MotoGP team interested at the moment. So you wonder. I don't think Jake has envisioned himself staying in Moto2 his entire career, and if there isn't a MotoGP option this year, where does he go? Maybe he'll start looking in World Superbikes for a seat. I don't know, but yeah, certainly circumstances has worked against him, I think.
Dave, Hugo Delamont asks, has the will to win gone from Aleix, and will he retire? And will also Jack lose his seat for 2025?
2 very good questions. I don't think Aleix's will to win has gone. He still wants to succeed. It's just that he is struggling to put things together. I think Maverick is just doing a better job so far this year. Aleix seems to be struggling a little bit with the bike, and a little bit of bad luck as well. Obviously, Jerez, they were unlucky with the weather. The Aprilia is good in the wet and it's good in the dry, but in that half and half drying conditions, which is usually what you get when it rains, it's very rare that you get just like a full rain race. You usually get sort of something, it has been raining and it's drying, or it is dry and it's just started raining. Those sort of conditions, and that's quite bad for a manufacturer to not be able to cope with those sort of conditions. But they're very difficult to actually reproduce. So I suspect that Aleix will end up retiring, but that's based on sort of nothing at all. Jack Miller, KTM seems to still love KTM, and he is really, really valuable to them. I think if he's willing to accept a spot in Tech 3, whatever happens to Tech 3, then he can stay. But he might decide, what with a kid and all the rest of it, that maybe he can make more money in World Superbikes. Not so much from salaries, because salaries are much lower in World Superbikes. But from if Ducati think he could replace Alvaro Bautista. If Bautista leaves, Bulega has been really strong as well. Put Jack Miller there. Jack would be great for the series. That'd be good for Dorna. He'd only have 12, 13, 14 races instead of 22. Get to spend more time at home, get to spend more time with his new kid, the whole thing. So I don't know what Jack's going to do, but if I was Jack, I would be having some. I would be definitely be having some interesting conversations in the World Superbike paddock to see what's possible.
Neil, John R. Wright asks, is the 2024 championship about Mark and Pecco, or is it too early to say?
No, I don't think it is just about those two riders. I think they will be involved for sure. I think they're probably the two strongest riders in the championship at the moment. But I think from the early rounds, we can also put Jorge Martin in there. Yes, he did crash on Sunday, but I think basically over the last 9-10 months, Martin has shown more often than not he is at least one of the quickest guys in the class, capable of winning victories. Had been super consistent up until that fall on Sunday. And I'm also not discounting Enea Bastianini just yet. He's kind of gone under the radar so far this year, but he scored 2 podiums. Jerez has never really been a great track for him, and he still managed, 5th was it on Sunday? Could have been fighting for the podium had he not got stuck behind Binder for so much of the race. And a couple of really good tracks are coming up for Bastianini now. Le Mans in particular, where he was victorious in 2022. So I would maybe just count him into the race as well. So I would expand it out to maybe 4 names at this current time.
Yeah, I mean, my immediate response was Jorge Martin is leading the championship, and if he hadn't crashed out, then his championship lead would be massive.
We've got a question from Miriam about stewarding. We've also got one from DJ Purchase as well, asking about the huge crowd figures and how they can be perhaps taken to other events like in the flyaways. Also something from Marcus Waymayer about the tyre pressure penalties and whether it will start getting a bit ridiculous towards the end of the season. Good stuff, guys. We're going to hold on to those ones for next week's show when we're previewing Le Mans. For now, we're just going to tackle this last one, both for you, David, and for Neil. Arquez asks, will Joe Roberts be in Trackhouse next year? Quite a simple one.
Yes.
Yeah, I think with each passing week, it's harder to find a reason for him not to be there. I think the only thing that could have held him back would have been his performances, and at the moment, his performances are the best he's ever shown in Grand Prix racing. He's leading the championship. He's had 3 back-to-back podiums. He's holding up his end of the deal, so to speak. So I think. And consider that we're going to Le Mans, Barcelona, and Mugello next. And he's had a pole position before at Le Mans. He led 2 years ago in Barcelona before crashing out. And he has been on the podium a couple of times at Mugello. So this next kind of run of tracks are really, really good for Joe. Perfect for him to continue this run of form. And if we get to the summer break and he's leading the championship or in the top 3, then I think it's an absolute no-brainer to stick him in Trackhouse next year.
Yeah, I spoke to him briefly after the Moto2 press conference, and he said, look, I'm in the perfect place. He's got the perfect people behind him, his background, the environment that he's in, the people he's working with. That's giving him loads of confidence. You feel that he's going to win a race or two, sort of in the next before the summer break. So yeah, absolutely, he's going to be there. And Raul, Raul Fernandez is. Not living up to his hype. I mean, he's doing a much better job than he was at the start of the season. But would you keep Raul, or would you take an American rider who is also just has loads of charisma, speaks amazing English, is funny, witty, extremely good looking for a young man? If you like that sort of thing, I'm too old for that sort of nonsense nowadays. But he is, he's very easy on the eye. So yeah, of course you put him in Trackhouse. It's good for everyone. It's a win-win for everybody, except for Raul Fernandez.
It's excellent to get these questions through, to be honest. I mean, guys, you're almost doing our editorial work for us. We like chatting with our patrons as well. And we have a Discord channel, which means, if you join up to our server, then you can tap away to us and we'll try to answer these questions during the Grand Prix. It's always a bit tricky, of course, due to time factors and whatever else and what's kind of going on. But we do try to interact and post some pictures and have some silly moments and banter where possible. So if you do fancy joining us on Patreon, then it's not just the audio video content and sometimes the video stuff, but then also the chance to interact with us when we're on the ground at the Grand Prix itself. Papa Pepe quickly sent a question through saying, has Pecco earned a new level of respect? I'm going to say only slightly, because I think the difference for Pecco's victory at the weekend showed that he's ready to go toe to toe with Marc Marquez. And Marquez has told us that his adaptation to the Ducati is over. He's able to push the motorcycle how he wants. So I think that was the first kind of scrap of many that we're going to see for the rest of the season. And that makes 2024 even more tantalizing. We mentioned Joe Roberts, and Neil, you sat down with the American just to introduce the interview. What was the general chat?
The general chat was, where has this recent run of form come from? How has he sort of transformed from a guy that has a decent result every now and again into one that is leading the championship and looking very consistent, very, very strong. And just a little bit about Joe as a person, as well as a rider. Maybe some of our listeners don't know that much about him, but he's a pretty interesting character, and he's not your standard rider that lives in Andorra and his life revolves around cycling and training. And I'm not saying that Joe doesn't work hard. He definitely puts the work in away from the track, but he is quite a varied skill set, varied set of interests. And I think that also makes him stand out quite a bit.
Yeah, it was a cool conversation. So here it is.
So I'm here with Joe Roberts. Joe, welcome to the Paddock Pass podcast. Thanks very much for coming on the show. We're here in Jerez on the Thursday before the GP starts. I would normally say that Jerez isn't maybe one of your favorite tracks, but during preseason, you were second fastest, I think, on all 3 days, and you've proved in the first couple of races that you're pretty much quick everywhere this year. So I guess you must be coming into this weekend fairly optimistic.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking about this just an hour ago in another interview about, I guess I've been branded this kind of rider that's always good on fast-flowing tracks like Brno or Mugello or Phillip Island, which I am. I do love those tracks. I do love fast-flowing corners, but I have always loved coming here. But it is a very specific track in the sense like you need the bike to be able to stop well, and I've never really had that. Especially the last few years, I've never had a bike I felt I could stop that well. It was always just pushing into the corner, and that's something that's changed this year in a big way, is that I'm able to get the thing stopped really well. And like you said, we came here in the testing, and it was, I think, my most positive preseason test I've ever had. So I'm definitely looking forward to getting on track tomorrow and seeing what we can do this weekend. And I don't really I feel like as a rider before, you kind of put tracks as, oh, damn, I'm going to this track, it's going to be a harder weekend. But this year, I don't know, I just have a different mentality on it all. I think each weekend has its tracks maybe some riders favor, but I just feel we're in a position with the team and myself with my riding right now that we can adapt to anything, I don't know, just feeling confident.
Yeah, you can see that in results. I think it's the first time you've ever had back-to-back podiums in your Grand Prix racing career, and you must still be on a massive high after your home podium less than 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, that was awesome, man. That was such a cool weekend. I think for me, going into that weekend, I've been trying to keep my mind calm. I have a lot of people that really helped me with that this year. My brother, who travels with me and helps me out, he's someone that helps me out in a big way. Knows what I'm thinking before I'm thinking it. Plus having John and someone in the same sort of way, but also on a technical side, able to know what I'm thinking before I'm thinking it. And so I just had all the tools that weekend to show up and deliver my best performance. And like I said, this bike now is able to like stop the way I like it and actually turn and get the thing pointed. And I knew it would work well in Coda, so I was really looking forward to going there. At times at that track before, I'd show like sessions where I'd be really quick, but I never could string a race together there that I was happy with. And definitely a whole different energy to be there and be fighting up front and getting that podium and carrying the flag around the track and engaging with all the American fans that showed up. I mean, it was probably the most fans we'd had at that circuit for a long time, and which is pretty exciting too, because I feel like the American buzz is only just getting started, right? Like I feel next year and for years to come, it's going to be it's going to be real exciting to see what happens in America. But man, coming around into the stadium section too was just so incredible. Like carrying the flag in there and just all the horns going off. I could hear it through my helmet. I did a nice little burnout for everybody there, and got off and chucked my gloves into the crowd. It was, man, such a special thing. Also, I had all my family and friends there, which normally I don't normally like that, because I feel it can go in two ways. Like you can, if you have a bunch of support there, it can be awesome when it's going really well. But if you're doing crap, it's almost like double, you know, it's like hurts even more, because you've got all these people that have come out to see you, and then you've just done shit. And then, you know, it's just like going to have dinner is not really an exciting thing. And, yeah, to have everybody there, it was the first time a lot of my family's seen me on a podium. All my podiums pretty much, except my brother, nobody had seen one before, and it's freaking awesome, man. And also one more thing, we went out to dinner to one of my favorite restaurants there, and we started chanting USA, and the whole restaurant did too. So that was pretty sick.
Wouldn't be a home GP without a USA chant, right?
Yeah. Right.
Absolutely. Joe, you've spoken a few times this year that your first contact coming back to this team after 3 years being away, it just felt like coming back to sort of a group and a family that you already knew. I mean, can you talk about that first moment when you came back here and it just seemed that everything clicked?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny coming back. I mean, I'm coming back under the banner of the same, you know, obviously it's the American racing team. The owners are the same. John's here. The other side, there's actually new people, but my team, except for my mechanic who I had in 2020, all the rest of the guys are all brand new. I've never worked with them. Well, actually, I worked with my crew chief last year, but my data guy I'd never worked with before. One of my mechanics I'd never worked with. And it's pretty awesome, because we've all come from a situation that we've not been happy in. Kind of just like teams that it didn't work out, or you didn't feel great in the environment. And I think we all didn't know what to expect. And I think even there was like something my crew chief said, mechanic said to him, he's like, man, Joe's actually nice. You know, because I don't know, maybe there's something going around there that I'm an asshole to work with. But I'm not, by the way.
Just to put that on the record, right?
Put that on the record. I'm a nice guy, all right? Anyways. But no, just awesome group of people, and I'm just so happy to show up to the weekends, man. I mean, I can't wait to get on the plane to get here, you know? I literally, before the, on our layover here, before we got here, I was just like, can we just already be on the plane to Jerez? And I don't know if I could say that for all the years before, that I was so excited to get to the circuit, because it's just entering something that I wasn't like happy in, you know? And yeah, it's just whatever happens this year, you know, wherever we end up in the championship or what results we get, I think that's just something right there to take away from that. It's just such a positive environment to be in. So, yeah, I'm really happy to be back.
Absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned that it's great to have a bike that you can stop as you want it to. Can you tell us just what is it about the Pirelli tires that seems to work with your riding style, that has helped you adapt so much quicker than other people, it seems?
Yeah, I spent a good amount of time on the Pirellis actually over the winter at this one track in California called Chuckwalla. It's a pretty funny place. It's just, the location's called Desert Center. And if you're there, you are in the center of the desert. There's literally nothing around. But they have a pretty cool racetrack out there, and I have my own personal R1 that I was just chucking tires at it, and Pirelli USA actually helped me out a lot there, giving me some tires to work on. But I think the one thing that these tires bring is just a little bit more front grip, which helps with the turning and also the feel too. I'm a pretty sensitive rider, you know. My feelings no, sometimes no. But the riding aspect, I'm pretty sensitive to things, and if I can feel what the tires are doing, I know where the limit is. I can ride that limit, and I think that's something that Pirelli's been able to give me. I still think that there's a lot to learn and still to develop with these tires. We're only at the beginning, and I believe that a lot of riders will get better throughout the season. But to adapt to them as quickly as we did and be competitive from the beginning, it's nice feeling, and I feel we will progress as well.
Absolutely. After the race in Austin, you said you were talking about your relationship with John Hopkins, who obviously works for the team as your personal manager as well, I believe. And you said that he kind of does my thinking for me, as if to say that he's able to kind of relay information or advice to me on whatever matter. I mean, can you just explain a little bit about that relationship and how he has an influence on you, how he can help you?
Well, yeah, I mean, he doesn't do all my thinking. That'd be crazy, but I don't know. I think in a team dynamic, especially as a rider, you are the one carrying, things revolve around what you are doing, right, on the track, and your explanations of how the bike is. And sometimes it's nice to have somebody there, like John for me, that when I talk to him about the track and the bike, I say, man, it's doing this thing, and the bike's always doing something when you're on the track. There's never a perfect bike out there. It doesn't exist. It never will for any rider. So it's all about prioritizing the things that need to be worked on, and I think over the years sometimes I put priorities on maybe the wrong thing, or I'll go out and get frustrated because I didn't finish where I wanted to, and I'll blurt out a couple things, and it'll give the team an idea of a direction that maybe wasn't the right one. Not every time, but it can happen, and to have someone like John there to listen to what I'm saying and going, he's been there, knows it. I mean, anything I've been through, he's been through 100 times, so and we're very similar in the fact the way we approached riding and our tendencies, my tendency is to overbrake into the corner. I rush the corner sometimes, or I run these kind of swooping wide lines compared to some of the other riders, and John's the same way. So we kind of know this thing about each other, and it's just somebody there to kind of do that. And not only that, just like at dinner too, just to have somebody to share stories with and have a friend in the paddock. It's just being an American here is not, it can be lonely at times, man. You don't really have a lot to relate to other riders with. Not to sound like a sad story, but it's just kind of how it is. Like, if you were here in the paddock, and you'd see a lot of the Spanish riders tend to kind of hang out with each other, train with each other, or Italians all have their kind of cliques, and I'm just the lone American here, man. Yeah. But even when Americans were here, I feel like there's also this thing where we don't even really, like when Cam was here, I'm good friends with Cam, but we wouldn't really spend a lot of time together, so it's just nice to have somebody like that.
Absolutely. Would you say that you are quite a different person to the Joe Roberts that was last in this team in 2020? Would you say the 3 years in Italtrans, you've obviously learned a lot, you've grown a lot, but would you say as a person, as a rider, racer, you're quite different?
I think there's a lot of elements to me that have changed. My mentality towards the sport has changed for sure. Getting older and more mature, a little bit more patient. I think my career, it's easy to kind of look at it and go, when I was younger, I had this kind of plan in my head of what was going to happen. It's easy to do that when you're competitive, just to like, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And for it to not go how I thought it would, this year I'm kind of in a state of, well, I don't know what's going to happen. That things just are just going to be what they're going to be. And the only thing that I know I can do is be here and each weekend take it as it comes, and just enjoy the environment I'm in. And I think it's probably, I can say, I know everyone talks about it like in all the health podcasts or all the things all the time. You got to stay in the present moment. I don't know if I ever have before now, really, truly. And I think that's something that a lot of people around me have helped me with, just getting my mental state to be in this present moment, and also myself. I mean, I think anytime in life you take decisions and they go a certain way, it's not about what happens, it's how you take them and how you learn from them and work forward. It's such a cliche, but it's so true. So I'm mature. I'm more mature than I was. I'm happy to be riding, and I'm just enjoying every day that I get to ride a motorcycle.
Yeah. Maybe a bit of a difficult question, Joe, this one, but it's well known that you had the chance to step up to MotoGP at the end of 2020 for 2021. You didn't take that, and then maybe Italtrans didn't quite work out as you were intending it to. You had some good races, but never quite, were fighting for the championship. Were there times when you were thinking, I had that chance and I didn't take it?
Oh man, yeah, of course. I think I'd be crazy if I didn't have those thoughts, I mean, that's part of the learning though, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, that whole experience was an interesting one. I definitely got like the most publicized for it. I mean, like there's a bunch of other riders who turned it down too, but I guess because I'm the American or something, everyone wanted to talk about it. But yeah, I mean, the decision I made was not even out of like anything selfish. It was just like, I'm here. I've come off a year that I didn't quite achieve what I wanted to in this class. I had done some cool stuff, got on the podium one time, a couple pole positions, and I was just in a state of just such self-belief that I thought, okay, I want to win this championship before I moved up, and this offer came super last minute, and I thought, I don't know, it just didn't feel right at the moment. And maybe it wasn't, man. Maybe it's, all this stuff has happened for a reason. Who knows? I guess we'll find out at the end of the year. But, yeah, I don't know. I'm just a big believer in all that. And that's something that me and John spoke a lot about, too, is just everything happens for a reason. And I know for one thing, this team I have now wouldn't have existed if I hadn't gone through all those years of hardship, and I wouldn't be in the mental state I am in now. So I feel like this is probably the best Joe Roberts that's ever ridden a motorcycle.
Yeah, which is a great thing, obviously. And Joe, it's you were saying earlier, it's a good time to be an American in this championship with the changes going on with the Liberty takeover and acquisition. There's constant now, it seems, rumor that it would be great to have an American in the Premier class, and I guess you fit the bill in some ways. Is there that sort of feeling that if I just smash this kind of first part of the season, that that could be a real opportunity?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think there's always things get floated around in this paddock. There's always rumors, there's always talk, and I think when a rider does well, people start to dream and think of things, and I think the possibility could be there if the results are there. And who knows, man? I mean, the one thing that stays true is what you do on the track. And I don't like to, I think one thing I've learned over the last few years is that anytime I engage in that type of thought process of, if this means this, I'll get this, all it's done is just disturbed my flow and disturbed what I've got going on in the team and pulled me out of that present moment, I do think it is a very exciting time for America, and I'm really excited to see where it all goes, and if I fit in somewhere and all that would be pretty sweet. But yeah, not to sound like what I've been saying to everybody else, but it is the real truth that I'm just so focused on delivering a great season and just getting the most potential out of me,
Just a few questions, Joe, to finish up, but our listeners might not know. You have tried living in Spain. You've lived in Portugal as well. I think the Andorra thing doesn't quite work for you, I don't think. You have a bit of a different approach to how you live during the year. You base yourself in London, right? And you just feel that the kind of environment in England, you've got some family there, if I'm not mistaken, that sort of works for you a little bit better than living on the Iberian Peninsula. I
floated around a little bit, like you said. Yeah, I did the Spain thing for like the early part of my career, and it's definitely cool there. It's a pretty cool environment to be a MotoGP racer, because everybody knows about it. You've got all these tracks set up that you can train at. But I did it so long that I think one thing that as an American coming here is you're always trying to find a place that feels close to home. I mean, you never will because home is home, but somewhere that feels not too foreign. Spain for me just felt, I never could find friends there that I was close with. I got a little bit sick of the way of working there and living there. So it's a cool place. I do like Spain, but I just, for living there, I wanted something different. When I moved to Italtrans, the team owner or team manager, Robertino Pietri, he was living in this town in the south of Portugal called Algesur, which is only about 30 minutes from the circuit there. And that was a pretty sick experience because I always wanted to live by the beach. And the house I had was just like 5 minutes. I'd just grab my surfboard, walk down to the beach, and not to mention they just had great waves there. You could surf, and it was kind of one of those like experiences. You'd get in a 4x4, drive through, a bunch of like trails, and you come down to this empty beach, no one's on it, and this perfect right-hand wave, and that was a pretty cool experience for a while. But it became like one of those things. I don't know if you have friends or people that become these permanent vacationers, just living in this place that's so remote and far removed from everything. And at the time, I didn't have a girlfriend, and just to socialize became like every day just felt the same, and I just need something different. So I ended up I am living in London. There's a couple reasons for that. One is everyone speaks English. I do have family that lives in the country nearby. My girlfriend works out there, and I feel I can get the things I need to get done. There's good training. I love running in the parks there. John lives close by to London, and go ride motocross and train and stuff. So yeah, I'm trying that out the last 2 years and been enjoying it.
Cool. And just finally, Joe, you mentioned surfing there. I know you've got quite a wide array of pursuits other than motorcycle racing that you like to enjoy. I mean, I know you're a keen musician. Bike maintenance and rebuilding bikes, old bikes, I think was a thing you were doing for one winter, if I'm not mistaken, as well. Do you have time between being a full-time Grand Prix rider? Do you have time to kind of follow these things, or do they take a bit of a back burner during the year?
I think they don't. I don't have time, but I always come up with something exciting and new for me to get my attention onto, and I always take it to my family, like, "Hey guys, I'm gonna do this now," and they always know that I'll just do it a little bit, and then, the music though is something I have kept with. I mean, I was in bands before I joined the World Championship. I mean, once I became traveling around the world, it became impossible to do that, but. Recently did a show this year actually with my younger brother for his music that came out, playing bass for him. So I really enjoy that. I love playing bass. I thought it was like, I picked bass because I thought it was the easiest thing. And I mean, it kind of is. I feel like everyone who's like, I play in a band, but they're not a great musician, they'll take the bass. But you know what I will say about bass? It's the heart and soul of the song, man. And it is really important. And if you're not good at it, it ruins everything. So, but yeah, now recently, my newest thing that I'm really loving into is I got into the old bikes and stuff from this photo shoot I did for my sponsor, Jacques-Marie Mage. They had this campaign, this video shoot, and had me riding one of these old 60s Triumphs. And I mean, I've always been a big fan of Steve McQueen, and the movie On Any Sunday was pretty like crucial for my inspiration to be a motorcycle rider. So I always had these like love for these old bikes, but never put my attention on getting one. And yeah, got to ride that thing, and then bought one like the next month, and yeah, been getting into these older bikes, and I just love the history of them. I don't really like dressing the part of like an old. There's a lot of guys who get into that old scene where they look exactly the way they did back then. I don't really like that, but I do love that I'm riding like a piece of history and the simplicity of how the motor was back then. Plus, not to mention, that bike is like so reliable, man. I never do any maintenance on it, and it always starts up first kick, so it's pretty sick. But my newest thing is been getting into welding. I just learned how to weld from this guy, Maxwell Hazan, who's this really awesome bike builder, like incredible bike builder. Some of the stuff he does, he like billets things by hand with this machine, spends 30 hours on this one piece, And yeah, it's pretty insane what he's able to do. But he taught me how to just do a straight line of a weld, so kind of cool. And I don't know where that will take me. Maybe I'll start building frames or building bikes. I'll definitely be able to make some sort of piece of, framing for my mom for her garden or something, at least.
Nice one, Joe. Well, as a former drummer and the butt of countless jokes, it's reassuring for me to hear that you say that a bass player is the least talented person in a band normally. But normally it's the drummer, I thought. But
dude, the drums. I mean, that I tried originally. I wanted to be a drummer, but that's a hard thing, man. You got a lot of stuff going on at once. Yeah. I do think I would be good at that. I mean, motorcycle riding is all these things at once, but yeah, maybe that's the next thing, man. Maybe I'm gonna start drumming.
Watch this space.
Yeah.
Exclusive. Joe, well, thanks very much for your time. It's been great seeing you up at the sharp end of Moto2 this year, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more of it in the races to come. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
All right. Thanks, man. Thank you for having me.
Excellent stuff, Neil. Really good to hear from Joe Roberts. I hope we can get him on the podcast a few more times, actually, before the end of the season and things go swimmingly for the American. And let's see, of course, what happens with Trackhouse Racing. The Alpine Stars Paddock Pass Fantasy League. I felt pretty good, to be honest, about swapping out Fabio Quartararo for Fabio Di Gianantonio. But after Saturday, I was cursing Bagnaia and Binder. I'm hovering around the sort of 600 mark of about 1,000 entrants in our league. How are you two boys getting on?
Disastrously, absolutely terribly. I mean, I have Pecco and Mark as my gold riders, so I thought, hey, Sunday, that's going to be quids in, so to speak. And then I looked in our podcast league, and I've dropped, I think, nearly 100 positions from somewhere like 850th down to 950th, which one hand goes to show how many people have joined the fantasy league in the last couple of weeks, but also how fierce the competition is. So everyone has brought their A game, so to speak.
Who are your silver riders?
Jorge Martin and Franco Morbidelli, and I've got Ducati as a constructor. So I would say that's a fairly decent stable.
Yeah, how did you get that team together?
Yeah, he got there. He got there early, is how he did it. This is one of the secrets: is to get there. Is sort of to get there early. I think I'm of the three of us. I'm leading, but we're all being completely destroyed by World Superbike commentator Steve English, which is extremely embarrassing.
With some help from Neil, Dave. With some help from Neil.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah, exactly. It's actually all down to Neil. Well, though why Neil didn't actually do that for himself is a bit of a mystery. I mean, I've got. I actually swapped Pedro from being a silver to a gold. So all I did was swap Enea Bastianini and Pedro Acosta over, and Pedro did me proud on Saturday, but not so much on Sunday after throwing himself into the gravel. Mark Marquez is obviously a good choice. He's my other gold rider, and I've got Taka and Nakagami just because that was all I could afford afterwards. And at last, Taka actually scored some points for me by finishing a race, which was good. But he's going to be first on the chopping block.
Yeah, if you fancy joining, guys, then just search for Alpine Stars Paddock Pass Podcast and you'll find our league. I think you can get in there with your current points total, so you just sort of slot into your position wherever it may be. Come and join us and play, and we have some banter on Discord about it.
Yeah, only join us if your current points total is less than ours, please, because otherwise the whole thing experience is too painful.
Yeah, we're supposed to be the, in inverted commas, experts. And we're shown to be quite the opposite of that.
Well, it also shows how sort of frenetic MotoGP is at the moment and how difficult it all is. So fair play. That's it, guys. Thanks once more to Renthal, to KTM, and to Fly Racing. We'll be back next week to look ahead to another heaving and historic Grand Prix with the Grand Prix de France at Le Mans. Let us know any feedback through wherever you get this podcast. Enjoy the free weekend. Join our Patreon channel for more content, and we'll be back next Wednesday.